Welcome to Public Affairs Roundtable, a discussion of current events in the nation and around the world and how they affect the people of Indiana. Here's your moderator, Larry Lough.
Today we're going to look at the changing face of employee benefit packages, how it affects you and workers across Indiana and the nation. We'll be looking at various trends and implications and why business managers are taking a new look at the packages they're offering their workers. We're also going to be looking at an innovative variation on the use of benefits programs. Our panelists for today's Public Affairs Roundtable are Ball State University professors Neil Palumba, Dean of the Ball State College of Business, Newman Williams, a finance professor who specializes in the area of insurance, and Bill Mosier, professor of marketing. Bill, we are seeing some pretty drastic changes, some real looks at, I guess, the cost of doing business.
Larry, I don't think there's any question that we're seeing just the tip of the iceberg now in terms of some of the changes that we're going to see in the future. But it is really starting to surface and starting to be very obvious that companies are taking a very close look at employee benefits, insurance programs, pension programs, things of this nature. Now, if we look at this, what actually happened, you actually have a increased awareness of the costs of some of these programs during the recession. In other words, you had companies that started looking more closely at all of their costs, and one of the things that they really focused on was the cost of your medical insurance and all the things that are in this category. And the things that a recent survey has shown that there has been substantial response or adjustment to that. Over 80% of the companies of the major corporations in the United States have shifted some of the burden over to the employees that the company carried.
That's a way of saying that employees' benefits have been cut, have been reduced.
Exactly. Right? They're having to participate. The employees, their benefits have been reduced, and they are having to carry more of the responsibility themselves, is exactly what has happened.
Are we reducing the standard of living of workers in America then?
I don't know that that's necessarily the case. I think it's really more legitimately described as a situation where the employees are going to become more aware of the costs of these different programs and the benefits that they provide and the cost of medical care and that sort of thing. So I would say that perhaps you might find some adjustments, but I don't know that necessarily is a reduction in the standard of living. I think it's a question of making everyone that's involved, everyone that's affected, more involved in the decision-making process.
Total agreement?
Total agreement. One of the things that I notice most about the cost of health insurance is that people don't know what it costs. I was listening to two men talk just yesterday. They were saying that, quote, if we had to buy the coverage rather than the company, health insurance would cost us $150 to $200 a month. They're way off. It's $300 to $350 a month. People don't know that health insurance is so expensive, mostly because it's either a payroll deduction or because their employer pays it totally. The amazing thing is the lack of knowledge, and what's going to happen is that people will come to realize that health care costs a great deal of money today. We're talking $3,500 a year per family right now, and the inflation rate is about 15% in this area.
Then it was one fantastic benefit, and now it's still a good deal. Is that what you're saying? That in these benefits packages, although they're seeing a reduction in the benefit, they're still getting a deal.
Well, they are still getting good health care coverage, and that's the point. But the cost of that care is growing higher and higher and higher constantly. I'd like to talk a little bit, if I could, at the start about the reasons for the increase in the cost of health care coverage. Many people tend to blame the physicians, greedy physicians, and I don't think that's the answer at all. First of all, health care is labor intensive. The last time I was in an emergency room, it was 5 a.m. on a Sunday morning. I thought I was having a heart attack. It turned out I wasn't. But they had to be able to run the tests at 5 in the morning to find out. A second problem is that medical care is changing very drastically. One of the tests I had run was called an angiogram. They ran a tube through my leg, up a vein into my heart, started taking lots of pictures. That's an expensive process. It took about a half an hour and cost about $3,000. The third cost is that people will not buy second-rate health care. We buy low-cost cars rather than Cadillacs, but we all want to be able to say that my doctor is the best. We demand the very best in health care, and probably rightly so. But we buy second class a lot of other places, the large economy size, but we don't want second-class health care.
We pay for the specialization, we pay for the technology, and we pay for it 24 hours a day. Is what
That's right. That's exactly what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying.
But okay, but employees, like we were talking about, these packages are accepting these cuts. I mean, we see it in union votes, taking concessions, cutting back on contract, cutting back on benefits.
I think one thing we have to identify in this, Larry, is that when we had this first, in other words, we go back 2-3 years and we had companies starting to take the close look. In other words, companies absorbed this cost increase for a couple of years. And then in the last 5 years, the more recent 3 years, they really started taking some action. Now, they faced a real problem because they were locked in to the labor contracts that did not permit that adjustment. So then if you have your employees, you have your blue-collar and you have your white-collar workers, you have a situation where the blue-collar workers are basically locked in, then what's the company going to do? They more greatly reduced the benefits they provide to the white-collar workers than they did to blue-collar workers at that time, because that's the only area of flexibility they had. And so there's still some adjusting, some settling in that is going on. What you see, though, is every time a new contract comes up, then this is a higher profile issue in that newer contract. In other words, it's something that behind closed doors they are negotiating very, very intensely about this. And this is something that, yes, the employees are starting to look at this more. They're more aware of it, and they are negotiating. But it was not a quick and simple adjustment. It was a very, very arduous and a very intense adjustment process.
Another concept along these lines is that for a number of years, our basic industries like auto and steel, this is going back some years now, we're in a very favorable position vis-a-vis the world, other countries' auto and steel industries. And when you're in a very favorable position, when you've got the best technology, when you're making very good profits, you tend to ignore. Because the inflation in healthcare has been going on for quite a while. It's gotten really bad lately, but it's been going on for quite a while, and the companies kept on absorbing that. But now, everywhere you look, you have domestic competition and international competition. And you have it in trucking, and you have it in airlines, and you have it in auto, and you have it in steel and plastics, and all types of manufacturing. And so now, every American business has sort of been, in a sense, taken aback and said, okay, to be competitive now, we've got to look at all of our costs, and once you begin to look at your costs, that healthcare one just looms right out. And so I'm not disagreeing with anything here. I'm just saying that's another factor that has brought it to the forefront today. Why now are we looking at it? Because right now, I don't think we'd be looking at it as closely today if U.S. autos still dominated the world. You know, if U.S. steel still dominated the world, and those companies were making these the old profit levels, they'd be talking a little bit about the healthcare costs and absorbing it.
Or if healthcare costs had not risen so out of proportion to everything else.
Exactly. Or as Newman said, is if we could shop around for, I don't want to say cut rate, less expensive.
Discount.
The bulk discount.
May I interject a concept here? It is the fact that there is really only one source from which we pay for health care. Now we can do this several ways. We can have the private individual pay his own health insurance or his own hospital bill. We can have the employer do it, or we can have government do it under some form of socialized medicine. But in the final analysis, the money comes from the employee, from the productive capacity of the employee. And whether he pays the money to the federal government in the form of taxes, or to Blue Cross Blue Shield in the form of medical insurance, or whether his wages are reduced by his employer and the employer pays for the insurance. It all comes out of the same pocket. What we have here is a perception, I think, more than a reality. I think your original premise was right. As healthcare increases, as the cost of healthcare increases, the standard of living of the American worker has to go down in all other areas. But I would suggest perhaps that our health is perhaps the most important part of our standard of living. I mean, having a nice car and a nice home is not worth much if you're too sick to enjoy them. So maybe we ought to keep on spending this great amount of money for health care. But it all comes from the same pocket, and that's the productive capacity of the worker who enjoys good health.
Well, are you then saying, Newman, really that you have the employee, the customer, the consumer has X amount of dollars and they need to reassess their priorities in terms of whether it's house or car or health insurance, or health care, all this sort of thing. They really need to evaluate their total financial planning and financial operation.
Well, I certainly agree with that, and I firmly believe, as I said, that good health is one of the most important things we can buy and enjoy. But the other idea is that the worker has been paying for his health insurance for many years, but hasn't realized it. I mean, where does General Motors get the money that it used to buy health insurance? It got it straight out of a budget for wages and salaries and benefits. It all came out of the same pot. The only difference is the tax implications if the employer doesn't pay it.
But you look at the example of Chrysler Corporation, or any automaker for that matter, but the Chrysler Corporation specifically, where Lee Iacocca has said, let's take a look at the insurance costs here, folks, because for years, as Neil pointed out, when the auto industry was going strong, when money was being made, unions come in with demand, even though the employee wage was higher than the average American worker, way above the average American worker. And the insurance benefits, the union come in and say, okay, we want a bargaining contract, we want more. And as long as the auto industry was doing well, was making millions of dollars, sure, why not? We'll spend more money there. But it got to a point, recession perhaps, when you reassess the cost of doing business and saying, where can we cut back? So weren't they given perhaps more than enough? In fact, wasn't the American, the consumer also paying for that? When I went to buy a car, as the price of the car escalated, wasn't the auto buyer paying for that insurance?
One of the statistics I read somewhere, and I'm sorry I can't quote the source, but it was that there is more health insurance in an automobile than there is steel. In other words, General Motors spends more for health insurance, or used to spend more for health insurance, than it did to buy the steel of which cars are made. That surprised me. It may surprise many, many people. But it has reached that point where the cost of insurance, the cost of the total benefit package, is one of the highest costs, other than labor, that an auto manufacturer faces. Of course, this has an impact on the world market. If we are going to compete with Japanese automobiles, we have to do something about it. But I think we need to remember that what industry is doing is not so much pushing the cost off on the worker. The worker has always paid it, really, but indirectly. But instead, we are making the employee aware of the cost so that he doesn't abuse health insurance, so that he doesn't go to the hospital every time he has a headache or a cold or something of this nature, that he uses health care when he really needs to.
Well, was that not responsible in part for the escalation in health costs? That in fact you had these people with these fantastic health insurance benefits who at the drop of the hat ran to the emergency room or went to the doctor or elected for cosmetic surgery. As long as the insurance paid for it, why not use it, or in this case abuse it?
Certainly this is another cause of the increase in the cost of health care and health insurance.
Excuse me, Newman. I would say, in fact, from my point of view, the biggest change we're going to see in health care in this country is this sensitizing of the users of the health care. I agree with Newman. I don't think we're going to go to second class health care, and people will say, well, I can't afford first class, I want second class. We all want first class health care, but we're going to be, more and more we're going to have not first dollar coverage. We pay a small percentage, depending on our income, of the benefits, so that we all of a sudden are aware. Maybe you don't have to run 15 tests. You want to do all the tests necessary, but maybe you don't want to do any. That balance between not enough tests, which you don't want, or too many where the costs are very high. Well, if the insurance company is picking up, fine, but as Newman says, the insurance company is all of us, really, because they just pass the costs on through. And so, but I think the biggest change we're going to see, and the biggest problem we're going to see, is how do you sensitize people to these costs that so they still get first-class health care, but they don't abuse, they don't overuse it. The federal government, for example, I think the biggest, from my reading of the literature, the biggest thing that's occurring in this area is the federal government in the Medicare area is going to these fixed payments for each incidence of disease or sickness. And supposedly now they're trying very hard to fix those payments at an efficient level, not too low, not too high. So if a hospital is efficient in what they do, the payment is sufficient. If the hospital is inefficient, the payment is not sufficient, but the insurance, that's all the insurance will pay, and in the case of Medicare, usually the individual can't pay much more. So I think that's going to have, what do we call that in indemnity insurance?
Yes, indemnity.
Yeah, indemnity insurance.
Sure,
We've had it with the cars for forever. You wreck your car and you get and you go through a bid process or whatever the process, and you're told we'll give you $3,000, and you can have that car fixed in England by hand for a cost of $100,000, but all the insurance company is going to give you is $3,000. And I think we're going to go that way. And hopefully, by the way, I use that analogy purposely because I believe, from the little experience I've had, is that basically we get first class car repair. I don't want to get any letters about that, but I don't think we have second rate or third rate car care. Maybe there are some problems, but if I have a little fender bender and I'm giving a fair estimate, I like the idea of knowing that this is what it's called, and then I go out and find a competent person to do it at that cost. And if it costs me an extra couple of dollars, I might put it out if I want something. And the same thing with healthcare.
It is very important, in my opinion, that we find a solution to this problem, because the implications, the long-term implications of us going along the way we are, becomes rationing of health care. They're starting to do this, I understand, in Great Britain, where you have to justify your life, your purpose in life, and this type of thing before they will give you life-saving health care. Down the road, let's say 20, 30 years, you perhaps need an artificial heart, which today I'm told runs $100,000, $200,000, and of course it will inflate like everything else. Probably there will be very few people who can afford an artificial heart out of their checking account. And the question will become, frankly, are you worth saving? Is your job such that you're contributing to society? Have you got any kids worth having a father? And it's going to be a sad situation when we get to that in the United States in healthcare. But if we don't solve these problems, that's exactly where we're going to be. We've learned recently that our government has a finite amount of money. They're always in debt.
Although the deficit seems to be infinite.
The deficit seems to be infinite. Our ability to pay for it is not infinite. The insurance companies have a finite amount of money, and corporations have a finite amount of money. I mean, even a company the size of General Motors is not without its limits. And if we don't solve the problem some way, we are going to have to start to pick and choose the people who can go to the hospital, not on the basis of their illness, but on the basis of their perceived worth to society, which is going to be quite a chore for somebody.
Well, is health care, in that case, or insurance coverage across the board, is it even across the social strata in the United States? Do the poorest get as good health care as the richest? I wouldn't think that'd be the case.
I think the very poor get quite good health care because they go in under what's called Medicaid, which is just health care for the very poor. The rich, of course, can afford very good health insurance. I would describe, and I'm not an economist, but I would describe the people who probably have the least good health insurance and health care as probably what I would describe as lower class or lower middle income, working but at minimum wage jobs, where the employer doesn't offer any group health insurance, and they certainly can't afford the $300 or $350 a month which good health insurance costs. These people sometimes go into the emergency room and charge it up to Medicaid, but I suspect it's not the very, very poor that have the worst, because they go in as charity patients under Medicaid and get quite good health care.
As we sensitize the worker, I think was the word you used, Neil, to the use or the abuse of these benefits, the insurance benefits and employee health packages, do we not run into somewhat of a dilemma as you say, maybe you only need 5 tests instead of 15 tests, but don't you have the problem with the doctor who is extremely concerned with his medical malpractice insurance rates and the fact that he wants to run the 15 tests to protect himself?
He not only wants to, he has to. The market for medical malpractice is drying up. It really is. Lloyd's of London, and most of our viewers have heard of Lloyd's of London perhaps, has just about refused to write medical malpractice reinsurance on American doctors now. And we are going to have to do something, probably with our judicial system, to change the impact of medical malpractice suits against the medical professions if we are going to, as Neil says, desensitize our patients so they'll settle for 5 exams rather than 15. A doctor today cannot take the chance. He's got to order every test he can think of, or he's going to get slapped with a big, big damage suit.
That's part and parcel of doing business, and that's part and parcel of, and the government will have to play some role in setting those standards or definitions as part of the payment for this, because part of the reason you pay people so much money for treating a doctor or a hospital to treat a patient is for all the tests they have to do, and part of those tests, as been mentioned, is this problem with insurance and suits.
And Newman, isn't this really what companies and institutions are doing when they're setting up these new programs where they're adjusting the health care so they then, in effect, monitor the fact that you need a second opinion, but it's not like it's multi-second opinions and this sort of thing? Are they trying to organize this arena?
They are certainly trying to lower the cost of all these extra tests. And we have yet to see what impact this is going to have on medical malpractice insurance. There is a conflict, obviously, between the physicians who insist to protect themselves they have to order 15 or 20 tests, and the medical insurers who say, no, you can get by with 2 or 3 tests. These cases won't go to trial for 6, 8, 10 years. Right. But when they do, there may be quite an impact on the cost of medical malpractice insurance, and thus on the further increase in the cost of medical care.
Which is today is actually reducing the number of doctors are getting out of the profession as a byproduct of this. You read of cases of long practicing physicians that have said, hey, it's just not worth the cost and the problem of the malpractice issue, and are taking jobs in private industry and this sort of thing. So what we're really talking about has very broad implications throughout society, I can see.
I don't think the public realizes what some physicians pay for medical malpractice insurance, and I really haven't kept too current with that. But we are talking in the thousands of dollars a year for a surgeon, for an anesthesiologist. I remember talking to an anesthesiologist a few years ago, and I'm sure his premium's gone up, but at that time, let's say 5 years ago, he was paying $20,000 a year for his malpractice insurance. You got to do a lot. You got to see a lot of patients to pay for $20,000. Well,
then of course that's really paid for by the consumer, who ends up paying for health or in insurance premiums themselves.
Of course. Back to my original point, the cost of health care is paid by the productive capacity of the worker and by no one else. How it's channeled through to the hospital and the doctor can be different.
How you launder that money.
How you launder that money, it still comes from the same place.
Okay, Bill, what are we going to see then in the next few years? Are we going to see a continued concessions by workers in terms of, in contracts anyway? I guess these set the standard for what the rest of the American people do. These contracts that set down
I think we're going to see a very intense look at this, and I think it's healthy. I agree with both Newman and Dean Plum exactly that we need to lay this out. This is something that I talk about in my purchasing courses where when you buy something, it's a lot better to see the full package, understand it, evaluate it. And so I think you're going to see some real honest looks at this, and the fact that you actually have in the Chrysler study, you had the representative FL-CIO involved in that study, says that they are very aware of this and are willing to take an honest look at it rather than it be something that is kind of an arguing point. I think it now is across the table discussion point rather than an absolute hostile confrontation. So I really think you're going to see significant impacts in terms of the willingness to look at this. I think you're going to see significant impacts, as we're already seeing, in hospitals and the whole system that we have for medical care in the United States, and I'm sure it's going to have a worldwide effect ultimately. In other words, we're rethinking this entire arena. GM, for example, I know pushes for its workers who are in the hospital to go to interim care facilities once they're past the first couple of days. That's just an example of that's a way they were able to deal with it in the short term. But I think you're going to see some significant long-term effects. Of course, we also, I think we see then that the union is taking an innovative role in this, and I think this is something that you may be knowledgeable about, Neil, something that we're one of the unions that's actually using this as a positive approach to their, membership?
Yeah, this new idea is being tried on a very limited basis right now. It's associate membership, I believe, where they're trying to get non-dues paying non-union members or former union members or workers who have voted for the union but the election went against them, so there's no union is there. They give them an associate membership where they'll get certain benefits, including health care.
Well, we're out of time, so we can't go to that now. Thanks to our panelists, Newman Williams, Dean Palumba, and Bill Mosher for the commentary on today's program. I'm Larry Lough. Thank you for being with us.
If you have comments regarding this program, please address them to John Rouse, Box 149, Muncie, Indiana 47305. The producer for Public Affairs Roundtable is John Rouse. Associate producers are Cecil Bohannon and Bill Mosher. This program is a production of University Media Services, the Department of Political Science, and radio and television stations on the campus of Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana.